You hear them before you see them. A hum, low, far away, then louder. Then the dust, this brown cloud rising off the earth like smoke. Then the shapes, motorcycles, dozens of them, one after another, moving together across dry, flat land. September 12, 2024, Zamfara State, northwest Nigeria, somewhere in the middle of this column, surrounded by armed men, rides a 38-year-old man. His followers call him the King of Kings, and for the last 2 years, the Nigerian military has been trying to find him. Today, they do. The gunfight lasts hours. When it ends, the King of Kings is dead. Across Zamfara, people celebrate. The governor calls it a major victory. Soldiers are given a reward of 1 million naira to split between 26 men. But within weeks, the violence got worse. His men didn't surrender. They split into factions, and those factions started fighting each other over his gold mines, weapons routes, and who would take his place. Because the King of Kings, you see, didn't just run a simple gang. He ran a well-oiled system, and the system didn't die with him. This is the story of that system, how it works, who pays for it, who profits from it, and why, after everything Nigeria has thrown at it, nobody has been able to shut it down. November 2025, Papiri village in Niger State. A mother presses her daughter's uniform, packs her bag, says a prayer at the door, and sends her to school. St. Mary's Catholic Secondary. The same school, the same morning routine. By noon, armed men on motorcycles have surrounded the compound. By evening, over 300 children and 12 teachers are gone, marched into the forest. No demands, no phone call, just silence. It was later confirmed that some had escaped, but this is still one of the largest school abductions in Nigerian history. The phone call comes later. It always does, sometimes within hours, sometimes the next day. A voice on the line, the victim's own, shaking, reading words someone is holding in front of them, or a stranger, calm, almost bored. The voice names a price, 5 million naira, 20 million, 100 million. The family doesn't have it. They never do. So they negotiate. And the negotiation can stretch for days, weeks, or even months. Between July 2024 and June 2025, 4,722 people were kidnapped across Nigeria. 997 separate incidents. To understand the scale of what we are dealing with, I spoke with Cheta Nwanze. He runs SBM Intelligence, a Lagos-based research firm that has spent years tracking every kidnapping in Nigeria. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak with me on this very important topic of insecurity in our country, Nigeria. So your team tracked nearly 5,000 kidnappings in a single year. When you first saw the full data set come together, what pattern emerged that surprised even you?
When you have just over 4,700 kidnappings, 4,700 people taken around in just under 1,000 incidents, it's almost 5 people per incident. That qualifies as a mass kidnapping. Now the pattern that really jumps out is not the scale. It's the democratization of the victim pool.
The kidnappers asked for a total of 48 billion naira. They collected 2.57 billion, about 5% of what they demanded. The ransom demands total 48 billion naira, but only 2.5 billion gets paid. What does that 5% collection rate tell us about how the system actually works?
It's the business model. I mean, if we go back to what I said earlier, it's a mass market thing. So just think of it as a sort of a scatter diagram, for want of a better word. When you go into a village, you pick 20 people, you know that some of them will not be able to pay. But there's the chance that one of the 20 will be able to pay. Maybe one of the 20 will die. So that's 5% collection rates. And think about it this way. It's actually, when you have 48 billion demanded, but just about 2.5 billion paid, that's roughly 5%. So So it's clearly a model of mass kidnaps. Grab as many people as we can, and then those people with fit pay, they go pay. Then the ones with no fit pay, well, anything with the same, they take up.
The Northwest accounted for 62% of every person taken, and the prices aren't random. Clergy are targeted more than almost anyone. 17 Catholic priests were taken in that 1-year window alone. The single biggest ransom was 766 million naira for one man, a high court judge in Borno State. That one payment was nearly a third of all the ransom money paid in the entire country that year. But once a price is agreed, once a family has sold land, borrowed from neighbors, emptied every account they have, somebody has to carry the money. Sometimes one man, one motorcycle, one black polythene bag full of cash. He rides into the forest until someone stops him. So how does a ransom delivery actually work? Walk us through the logistics.
This one man on a motorcycle model that you see from, for example, from the Islamia school case is real, but it's not the entire picture. So let's start with Kuriga, the school kidnap, where was it 135 pupils were taken. The negotiators did not show up with an envelope. They arrived in SUVs and Hilux trucks. Cash was transferred at the forest edge, loaded onto 18 motorcycles. Each motorcycle carrying 2 Ghana must go back stuffed with money. That tells you something. This is a logistical operation. Basically, these groups have holding camps that are deep in forests in places like Rigasa, Birningwari, Zamfara. The money has to be moved across terrain that the security forces, I'm not going to say can't patrol. What I would say is will not patrol. 2024 report, we pointed out a new trend that's a very bad new trend. Ransom bearers getting killed or kidnapped themselves. The most striking case was one of a chap, 27-year-old guy named Abba, who was delivering 16 million naira and 3 motorcycles to kidnappers in Kaduna State. And then they killed him for being rude because he was trying to keep his own motorcycle. Then there was another case in Dogondaji in Kaduna. Kidnappers shot and killed 2 vigilantes who had volunteered to be ransom bearers, then killed the 3 hostages anyway after collecting 25 million naira.
Well, in 2021, parents of children kidnapped from an Islamic school in Niger State pulled a second payment of 30 million. They gave it to a local man named Kasimo and sent him along with a few others in the delivery party into the forest. The bandits took the money, but then they took Kasimo. They said the cash was 4.6 million short, and as punishment, the parents now owed them 6 brand new motorcycles on top of it. A year later, the army intercepted 60 million naira heading to bandits in Kaduna, cash in bags on its way to the forest, and among the people caught carrying it were security personnel. The same people who were paid to fight the kidnappers allegedly were helping deliver money to them. This isn't crime the way most people think of crime. This is a system. It has pricing, it has logistics, allegedly. It has people on both sides of the uniform involved. And just like any system, it has a structure. Back in Papiri, the mother is still waiting. She still waits for weeks. And during that time, 2 parents from that school, one father, one mother, will die before their children come home. Not from bullets, but from the weight of not knowing what happened to their children. In March 2018, the warlord named Abubakar Abdullahi called a meeting with his former commander, a man named Buharin Daji. The two had fallen out over cattle. Daji had raided the settlement of Abdullahi's in-laws and stolen their herd. When Abdullahi demanded they be returned, Daji refused, said the cattle had already been shared among his boys. And so Abdullahi proposed a sit-down, a resolution. Daji agreed. He showed up with about 24 of his men. They came to talk. Abdullahi shot him in the chest. His boys opened fire on the rest, and then he took over Daji's territory. His camps, his fighters, his villages. People in the forest of Zamfara came to know him as Dogo Gide. He built a stretch of territory around Dansado where villagers farmed for him. He took a share of the harvest. He settled disputes. He decided who could travel and who couldn't. And then in October 2021, reports emerged that Gide himself had been shot dead by his own deputy in the same forest he'd taken from Daji. But reports were never confirmed. As recently as 2024, in fact, security analysts and intelligence sources were still referencing his camp as operational. Whether Gide is alive or whether his network simply absorbed his name, the model he built didn't die, and Dogo Gide was just one of them. Across northwest Nigeria, there are more than 120 armed groups just like this one. Each one is run by a Kachala, a commander with a deputy below him, and an enforcer called a Smalley who takes charge when the Kachala is away. Below them, we have the fighters, mostly teenagers and young men, Fulani boys from broken villages, families who lost their cattle and their land in the same decade. In Zamfara state alone, there were an estimated 30,000 fighters spread across more than 100 camps as of 2021. That number has only grown. No single Kachala controls all of them. There is no council, no central command. Each one runs his own territory. But when a big operation comes along, a mass kidnapping, a highway ambush, or an attack on a military base, 3 or 4 Kachalas pull their men and their motorcycles. It is a franchise, not a chain of command. And this franchise makes money in 5 different ways. There's kidnapping for ransom, gold mine royalties, cattle rustling, forced labor farming, and taxes. The taxes are the part that changes how you view all of this. In 2022, a reporter from Premium Times spent 8 weeks inside bandit-controlled territory in Zamfara. What he found wasn't just raiding, it was a government. Villagers paying levies of hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of naira, just to be left alone. In one community, Dada, in the burning Magaji area, armed gangs raided farmlands, chased away farmers with guns, and then came back to demand 1.5 million naira. The villagers pulled it. Some given 500 naira, others given 15,000, whatever they had. After they paid, they were given exactly 1 week to harvest their crops. In another part of the region, a bandit leader from Bello Tuji's gang, a man called Dan Bakolo, went even further. He didn't just collect the money, he replaced the traditional ruler of a town called Gangara and installed himself as the new village head. In Sokoto, 42 villages in the Sabon Burning area paid over 67 million naira in levies to bandits operating in Bello Tuji's territory. This happened in a single week. The revenue fed a pipeline that security analysts say funds recruitment, arms procurement, and territorial expansion. Bandits settling disputes, collecting zakat, running courts, and punishing people who break the rules. This doesn't look like a criminal network. This is governance, a shadow state running inside the space that the real state walked away from. Now, we've shown you earlier how the King of Kings died in the firefight with the Nigerian army. But that convoy, those dozens of motorcycles, those armed men, that was just the surface. What made this man, Halilu Sububu, dangerous wasn't his guns. It was what he did with gold. He controlled the largest share of gold mines under bandit management in Zamfara. Every miner in his territory, Nigerian, Burkinabe, Chinese, they all paid him a quart every week. And that gold didn't sit in a vault, it moved across borders into the hands of arms dealers who sent back AK-47s. According to court documents filed in Abuja, his network acquired a military gun truck from Libya, routed through Niger Republic at a cost of 28.5 million naira, paid partly in cash and partly by electronic transfer. Sobubu didn't just arm his own fighters, he sold weapons to other Kachalas. He was the dealer, the middleman, the man who turned gold from Zamfara into AK-47s for gangs across 6 states. But then the army killed him and something strange happened. The violence didn't slow down. His men split into factions. Mati grabbing for the mines, Najaja building his own command, Babuga carving out a separate base. They started fighting each other over who would take his place. So killing the King of Kings didn't break the system, it shattered it into pieces, and the pieces kept cutting. But his death did produce one thing nobody expected: a courtroom. You see, on December 23, 2024, 4 men linked to the networks of both Sobubu and Bello Turji were arraigned at the Federal High Court in Abuja on 11 counts of terrorism. Among them, Musa Kamarawa, a former aide to a state governor. The charges alleged they had provided material support, that is drugs, weapons, vehicles, military uniforms, to bandit groups across the Northwest. Months later, in March 2025, a witness, identified only as ABC, took the stand. He described how one of the defendants had personally delivered the gun truck to Sobubu's camp in Sobubu Forest, how the bandits fired into the air in celebration when it arrived, how they pushed for photographs with the vehicle, Sobubu, the witness, and the defendant all standing together. It was one of the only times the inner workings of the system had ever been spoken aloud in a Nigerian court. And now on to the man who survived him. He's named Bello Turji, born in 1994 in Shinkafi, Zamfara. He grew up herding cattle, no school, no formal education. He says the Yansakai, that is this vigilante group, killed 6 of his siblings and stole his family's cattle. He says his father tried to sue the emir of Zomi and got nothing. So he picked up a gun. By 27, he had a reputation. Sobubu had trained him. Shehu Rigeb, one of Sobubu's most trusted lieutenants with connections stretching across the Sahel, linked Turji to the wider arms network. And then the killing started. September 2021, allegedly, after the Yansakai killed 11 Fulani men at a mosque in Guadabawa, Turji led his fighters to the market in Goronyo, Sokoto. They opened fire on shoppers. At least 50 people died. Some accounts say over 60. And then December 2021, his men ambushed a bus in Sabon Birni. They set it on fire, with the passengers still inside. About 30 people burned alive. January 2022, a wave of attacks across Zamfara, village after village, over 200 dead in a single week. Allegedly, the Air Force bombed his compound. They killed his son. They killed his second in command, a man named Aminu Kanawa. In January 2025, along with over 24 other fighters, they inflicted what the military called terminal injuries on his younger brother, Doso. His bounty was 5 million naira. The military has announced his camps destroyed and his network degraded, but this has happened more than once. He's still alive. And then in December 2025, a video surfaced that blew open one of the most dangerous questions in Nigerian politics. It didn't start with Turji. It started with a man named Musa Kamarawa, a former aide to Bello Matawale, the man who was governor of Zamfara when Turji rose to power. Kamarawa alleged that while Matawale was governor, he purchased 34 brand new Hilux trucks and distributed them to Kachalas, including Sobubu, Turji, and Ado Aleru. He said he personally handled some of the transactions. He said the house was bought and completed for Bello Turji. He said 88 million naira was given to bandit leaders to buy cattle for government ceremonies. Then Bello Asada, an Islamic cleric, corroborated the claims and added his own. But then Turji himself released a video. He confirmed that he actually met Matawale at the Zamfara government house during peace talks, but he denied receiving any money. And crucially, he didn't defend Matawale either. He said the governor had ordered airstrikes that killed 70 of his people, including women and children. He said Matawale had his father arrested and jailed for no reason. The current Zamfara governor, Dauda Lawal, went on national television and said his predecessor, quote, was fully involved in some of this banditry. He called on Matawale to resign. Matawale, through his spokesperson, denied everything. He called Kamarawa a convicted gun runner. But the question didn't go away. The man multiple sources accused of arming Kachalas now runs the ministry fighting them. You see, Tuji didn't fall from the sky. None of them did. They used to be herders. For as long as anyone can remember, Fulani communities moved with the seasons. North when the rains came and the Sahel turned green, and south when the land dried up and the cattle needed water. They grazed their herds. They traded with farming villages along the way. It worked. Well, until land started running out. Less water, fewer grazing corridors, more people fighting over less farmland. Cattle went missing. Herders blamed farmers. Farmers blamed herders. And then the third group showed up. The Yansakai. The Yansakai were vigilantes. These were house of farming communities who armed themselves to fight back against rustlers. But they didn't just go after cattle thieves. They went after Fulani herders. Any Fulani herder, Tuji says they killed 6 of his siblings, stole his family's cattle. His father tried to sue, but nothing happened. The police weren't there, the courts didn't work. The government, both federal, state, and even local, was absent from these rural areas in ways that are hard to believe unless you've been there. So the herders began arming themselves, first with machetes, then with Dane guns, 1 single barrel shotguns. And then somebody crossed the border into Niger and came back with an AK-47. By 2018, everything had changed. A kidnapping paid more in a single week than a year of herding. A gold mine was worth more than any grazing corridor. The men who picked up guns to protect their cattle were now running armies. You see, banditry in the Northwest is mostly Fulani. That is a fact. But calling it an ethnic war misses what's actually happening. Mark Ban, that is the main Fulani Cattle Breeders Association, says more than 18,000 of his own members have been killed and over 1 million displaced by the same violence since 2015. More than 87,000 homes destroyed. Over 1 million cattle rustled or slaughtered. In 2025 alone, at least 8 of their state leaders were assassinated.
We always have issues with vigilantes. Some time ago, they detained some of my boys and collected 300,000 from them, after which they went to seize their rams. Since then, nothing has been done. If it had been my boys who did this to a Hausa man, people would be complaining. Yes, of course. At first, when the conflict started, it did not reach this magnitude. It got to a point where we had to leave our communities and go to places where we had access to weapons. At that time, there were fewer AK-47s in our forest. Probably 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10. But now, only God knows. For example, you may find someone with 1,000 AK-47. You see the danger? But had it been the authorities intervened early, we wouldn't have cared to look for guns or leave our houses because we didn't know anywhere else to go.
The cartel recruits from Fulani communities. It also destroys them. But a system this big, fighters across 6 states, 5 ways of making money, shadow governments running entire villages, this sort of system doesn't survive on machetes and stolen cattle. it survives on military-grade weapons, and those weapons travel a very long road to get here. That road starts 3,000 kilometers away. In October 2011, Muammar Gaddafi was killed. His regime collapsed, and nobody secured the weapons. AK-47s, RPGs, machine guns, anti-aircraft systems, millions of rounds of ammunition. Gaddafi had stockpiled enough to arm several national armies. Within months of his death, all of it was moving across borders no one was guarding. From southwestern Libya, the weapons travel by 4x4 through the Sahara into Niger. They are stored around Agadez, a crossroad that smugglers have used for centuries. From there, 3 roads push south: Agadez to Zinda, Abalak to Tahua to Benin Nkoni, Madawa to Guidan, Rumji to Maradi. All 3 end in the same place, Nigeria's northwest. In April 2021, Nigerian soldiers stopped a convoy of Toyota Hiluxes near a town called Ingal. Inside were 77 AK-47s, 7 RPGs, 30,000 rounds of ammunition, 2 rocket launchers. That convoy was reportedly heading for Maiduguri, Nigeria's northwest, suspected Boko Haram territory. But the road it traveled is the same road that feeds the northwest, the same drugs, the same weapons, the same smugglers walking the same desert corridor. That was one convoy, one day, one road. And the border those weapons cross, Nigeria's entire northern frontier, 1,500 kilometers of scrubland, is patrolled by an estimated 1,950 people. But the weapons don't move on cash alone. They move on gold. Cartellers take a weekly cut from every miner working on their land. Nigerian miners, Burkinabe workers, Chinese companies, everyone pays. And that gold goes straight across the border into the hands of arms dealers who send back AK-47s. Under Sububu, the gold for arms exchange ran through partners in Mali and Burkina Faso. When he was killed and his network fractured, lieutenants like Mati scrambled to secure their own supply lines, reaching into new markets across the Sahel. And just a second source of weapons, Conflict Armament Research, an organization that traces weapons across conflict zones, has investigated firearms recovered from armed groups in northern Nigeria. The findings were that some of those weapons were traced back to Nigerian state armories. Nigerian manufactured ammunition, according to the UNODC, is the second most prevalent type found in bandit hands across the Sahel dataset. Allegedly, some of the guns bandits carry can be traced back to the same armories the military draws from. And the supply chain has people too. By 2022, women were moving ammunition and disassembled weapons under their clothing and inside food packages. One woman caught in Sokoto State carrying 991 rounds of AK-47 ammunition, trafficking them from Dabagi village to a bandit kingpin in Zamfara. Another arrested in Plateau State with 8 locally built AK revolvers and submachine guns, plus 400 rounds, all heading northwest to bandit camps in Kaduna, Katsina, and Zamfara. And then in July 2023, Niger's government fell in a military coup. The security cooperation along the border, already thin, collapsed. The road from Libya to Zamfara has never been more open. And by 2021, this pipeline had already delivered something the Nigerian military never expected. Something that proved the bandits had moved past anything the state was ready for. It happened on an afternoon in July, in the sky above Zamfara. July 18, 2021. The Nigerian Air Force Alpha jet is heading home. The mission is done. A strike along the Zamfara-Kaduna boundary. The pilot, Flight Lieutenant Abayomi Dairo, is flying the return leg. This was quite routine. The jet passes over a stretch of forest that local sources say was controlled by a Kachala named Ali Kawaje. And the ground reaches up. Ground fire hits the aircraft. The jet goes down. Dairo ejects. He lands alone in bandit territory. surrounded by the same men his mission just bombed. For the rest of the day, he hides, waiting for sunset. When darkness falls, he uses his phone to navigate through the forest, past one bandit camp and then another, until he reaches a Nigerian army unit. He makes it out alive, but the jet does not. 5 days later, the same group destroys a Mohawk Piranha, an armored military vehicle in Dansadao. No armed group in the Northwest had ever brought down a military aircraft before. This was new, and it meant the weapons had changed. These weren't AK-47s anymore. Analysts said the bandits now had heavy machine guns, possibly anti-aircraft guns, the kind of hardware you don't find in a village, the kind you buy from an international arms pipeline with ransom money and gold. And then came the report that nobody seemed to act on. Intermediaries who had walked into bandit forests to negotiate, including people like Sheikh Ahmad Gomi, an Islamic cleric with direct access to multiple kachalas, reported back that the bandit leaders were actively seeking surface-to-air missiles in the hands of men who started out rustling cattle. Ali Kawaje, the Kachala whose men are believed to have brought down the jet, was later killed in a December 2023 airstrike near Copper Hills. But the weapons his network bought are still in the forest, and the pipeline that supplied them is still running. The weapons that brought down the Alpha jet were paid for with gold from Zamfara mines and ransom from Zamfara kidnappings. But the mines aren't just funding warlords. They are where the Kachalas, the politicians, and the foreign companies all meet. You see, between 2012 and 2022, the UAE imported nearly 2,600 tons of undeclared gold from Africa, roughly $115 billion worth. And Nigeria's own solid minerals minister, Dele Alake, has admitted publicly that a large portion of Nigerian gold ends up in the UAE unlawfully, which means the next part of this story isn't about the forest, it's about Abuja, because the most powerful people in this system, it appears, don't carry guns. On December 12, 2023, Nigeria's Minister of Solid Minerals, Dele Alake, sat before the House Committee on Solid Minerals in Abuja. He was there to defend his ministry's budget. But what he said went far beyond the numbers. The illegal mining that funds the arms pipeline, the mining that bankrolls the Kachalas, wasn't the work of petty criminals, he said. It was being sponsored by powerful Nigerians, not foreigners, not small-time hustlers, heavy, powerful individuals inside the country. He said the government was working to identify them, but that was months ago. No names have been published. But Alake wasn't alone. In January 2025, Senator Adams Ashomole, the chairman of the Senate Committee on Interior, went even further. Retired military generals, he said. That's who was behind the mining. He said he knew who they were. He described how they used helicopters to access illegal mine sites, dropped weapons to armed civilians to guard the operations, and carted away gold out of the country, making billions of dollars while the country suffered. And then he said this. He had already written to President Buhari years before with exactly this intelligence. In writing, the retired general had personally briefed him on what was happening. He passed the letter on to the president and urged him to act. What subsequently happened, Oshomole said, was exactly what the general had warned him was going to happen. No arrest followed. No investigation was announced. In fact, a retired major general named Bamidele Olawumi publicly told Oshomole to produce the evidence, calling the allegations reckless, baseless, and offensive. Well, Oshomole hasn't provided evidence. So why does nothing happen? Why do these accusations land in public, on the record, from a minister and a senator, and then just disappear? Well, part of the answer is something called the security vote. You see, every year, Nigerian officials across all three tiers of government receive a combined 241 billion naira, sometimes in cash. Officially, it's for security. State governors alone account for roughly 209 billion of that total. The rest goes to federal officials and 774 local government chairpersons. No oversight, no receipts, no one asking where it went. Officials get billions, unaudited, to fight insecurity. The worse the insecurity gets, the more cash they receive. The more cash they receive, the more disappears. Peace, it appears, doesn't pay, but chaos does. And that is where Bello Matawalle comes in. Matawalle was governor of Zamfara from 2019 to 2023. And during that time, he launched a peace program. He invited Kachalas to government house. His officials sat with Toji and other warlords. In 2023, President Tinubu made him Minister of State for Defense. And in December 2025, the arrangement blew wide open. It started with Musa Kamarawa, Matawalle's former aide, who alleged that while Matawalle was governor, he purchased 34 brand new Hilux trucks and distributed them to Kachalas. He also said millions were paid to bandit leaders. Then Bello Asada, an Islamic cleric, corroborated the claims. And then Tuji himself released a video. He confirmed that he met Matawalle at the government house during peace negotiations, but denied receiving any money. None of these allegations have been tested in any court. But what is clear is this: the man who sat across from warlords as governor now sits in the ministry charged with defeating them. And that brings us to the question we've been building toward. If the state has the legal tools, and it does, if it has the military power, and it does, if it has the intelligence, and a sitting senator says it does, why in over a decade of this crisis has the state never successfully put a single major bandit warlord on trial? Associates have been arraigned, suppliers have been charged, but the Kachalas themselves, killed in airstrikes, killed by each other, never captured, never tried, never cross-examined under oath. January 5th, 2022. The federal government puts it on paper. Armed bandits, officially, legally, are now terrorists. This is contained in the Terrorism Prevention Act. Membership in a designated group gets up to life in prison. That was over 4 years ago. Since then, the military has killed hundreds of fighters. Airstrikes have flattened forest camps. Operations with names like Hadarin Dachi, Sahel Sanity, Fansan Yama, and Whale Punch have circled through the northwest. One after another, and across all of it, every operation, every raid, every arrest, the number of bandit Kachalas who have been taken to court, tried, and convicted is exactly zero. They get killed. Sububu airstrike, September 2024. Ali Kawaje airstrike, December 2023. Dan Karami joint military operation, April 2025. Although his death has been falsely reported once before. And they also get amnesty. Kachalas have walked into military camps, handed over a few guns, and walked out free men. If Musa Kamara's allegations are true, they get Hilux trucks, but they never sit in front of a judge. Now, think about this. In the first 3 months of 2026, just 90 days, Nigeria's Drug Enforcement Agency, that is the NDLEA, secured 974 drug convictions, 11 kingpins, 254 years in prison between them. 974 in 3 months for drugs, 0 in 3.5 years for the men who kidnapped children and killed some of them.
You've described kidnapping in Nigeria as an industry, extracting over 2 billion naira for the culprits. Now, when did it cross from a security problem into an economic system? And is there a point of no return here?
In my view, in my opinion, drug offenders are easier targets. But more importantly, the drug trade doesn't threaten the political establishment in the same way that the that banditry does. The drug trade is a major threat to the political establishment because it has international ramifications. So there's the incentive to go after them and bring them to book so that it will not further. The Nigerian passport is one of the weakest in the world already. So there's that incentive to, I mean, there's nobody that I know, myself included, that likes showing up at an international airport and being treated. I try to avoid Schiphol as much as I can, Schiphol in the Netherlands, because when you're coming from Nigeria, there's always a dog outside the plane waiting to sniff all of us. It's embarrassing. So there's the incentive to really go after the drug trade. But the kidnap thing is almost completely internal. The contrast between the 974 NDLEA convictions and zero bandit convictions is not really about capacity or legal frameworks. It's really about political will applied to different threats.
The Nigerian state knows how to convict people. He knows how to build cases, secure witnesses, and put kingpins in prison. He does it for drug dealers every single quarter. But he does not do it for the men running the system behind the kidnapping industry. 303 children were taken from St. Mary's that November morning. About 50 or so escaped on their own. 100 were released on December 8th. The last 115 came home on December 21st. 2 parents died while waiting. Anthony Musa died of a heart attack when he learned 3 of his children were gone. A second parent, a woman whose name was never released, died the same week. But no one has been publicly identified, arrested, or charged for the St. Mary's abduction. And now, the system that nobody stopped is turning into something worse. Every piece of research on this conflict, from West Point's Combating Terrorism Center, from the International Crisis Group, from the researchers who have walked into this forest, says the same thing. Jihadists have tried to recruit Nigerian bandits, and they have mostly failed. Where the two sides do work together is a deal, not a conversion. Bandits get weapons and bomb-making skills. Jihadists get a place to hide. The ideology is a flag that wave when it's useful and fold when it's not. That is the pattern across years of conflict. But there's one place where the pattern broke. You see, in late 2017, community leaders in 2 districts of Sokoto State, Bale in Godu and Gongono in Tangaza, had a problem. Bandits from Zamfara were raiding their villages. The military wasn't there. The police weren't coming. So the district heads sat down with the local chairman of Makban, that is the Cattle Breeders Association, a man named Alhaji Bello Wamako, and they made a deal. They would bring in fighters from Mali. The fighters came. They were good at what they did. They drove the bandits back. For a while, the villages were safe. But then, they didn't leave. They set up their own courts, strict Sharia enforced with beatings, young men punished for shaving their beards, for listening to music. They started collecting taxes, settling disputes their way, recruiting local boys with cash payments of up to 1 million naira per recruit. When tensions rose, the relationship turned lethal. In 2019, Nigerian members of the group returned and killed the district head of Bali, the same leader who had helped invite them. According to the Hudson Institute, the killing was triggered by a dispute over 63 million naira in cash the fighters had left for safekeeping with the chief's son. It was never returned. By 2024, this group had a name. They are called Lakurawa. And this is where it gets complicated in a way we need to be honest about. The original Malian fighters had roots in jihadist networks that would later merge into JINIM, that is Al-Qaeda's coalition in the Sahel. But some of the Nigerian fighters who joined later shifted toward the Islamic State Sahel province. According to the Hudson Institute, Lakurawa has become a catch-all name that covers fighters linked to both Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State operating in the same area. But what matters for this story isn't which global franchise they belong to. What matters is what they do. Lakurawa doesn't just raid and live like the Kachalas. It stays, it governs, it builds a shadow state with religious courts, tax collection, and armed enforcement, all backed by an international command structure. The Kachalas who came before them, people like Toji, Dogogide, they appointed village heads and collected levies, but they did it for money. Lakurawa does it for territory and for ideology. Halilu Sububu is dead. Ali Kawaje is dead. Dan Karami is dead. The Nigerian military has killed dozens of Kachalas, and the violence in 2025 was worse than in 2024. In the first half of the year alone, at least 2,266 people were killed by bandits and insurgents, surpassing the total for all of 2024. The crisis has spread from the northwest into Kwara, Plateau, and central Nigeria. This was never about one man. It was never one gang. It was an economy built on ransom, gold, and impunity. An economy that turns boys into soldiers, villages into revenue, and political chaos into career advancement. A sitting minister told parliament that powerful Nigerians sponsor it. A sitting senator told the Senate he knows who they are, and that he informed the president in writing. None of them have named a single sponsor. None of them have started a single prosecution.
You've described kidnapping in Nigeria as an industry extracting over 2 billion naira for the culprits. Now, when did it cross from a security problem into an economic system? And is there a point of no return here?
Basically, whoever did that research, and yes, they quoted us because at the end of it, because a lot of people called me after watching it. But whoever did the research did good work, because they properly mapped the entire chain of what is an industry. So again, pricing structure, presence; supply chains, presence; distribution network, presence. They have informers, they have couriers, the arms have to move, and there's even diversification happening now. So some of the people who were into kidnapping in places like Zamfara have now started doing illegal mining. That's diversification. So when you look at it in this, it's an economy. We're watching an economy. All I will say is that there is never a point of no return. The real question is, how much force do we need to bring to bear to bring it back to normal? And it's not just about force, as Trump is finding out in Iran, for example. It's also about what you do, what you can do. So one of the things that we will need to do to bring it back to normal, and this is to break the supply chains. I think one of the most tragic things I ever had to write was back in 2017, when we wrote a report that basically showed people who had been brought back from Boko Haram custody to rehabilitation centers going back to Boko Haram voluntarily. We need to fix basic economics, the basic normal economy, in order for us to get this thing over and done with. Until we do that, it probably will keep getting worse. But looking at the data, it's undeniable. We now have a kidnap industry. It's a part of our economy. It's not just a failure of security. It's a functioning economic system. It's a failure of the economy. And like any economy, it's a dark economy. And like any economy, it will continue to grow until the cost of operation exceeds the profits. Right now, the cost of operation is way below the profit, so more people will get involved. The Nigerian state has not done anything to raise this cost of operation. Until it raises the cost of operation, the industry will continue to grow.
While the sponsors stay hidden, the system has changed shape. What started as cattle rustling became kidnapping. What became kidnapping soon morphed into a cartel. And as of May 2026, no bandit warlord has ever been convicted in a Nigerian court. I am Jude Bella, and this is Declassified on News Central.